Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Viscuso. We're giving this a couple more minutes for everybody to be able to log on in a timely manner before we get started here. So give it a minute or two. Folks are still logging on, so. Give it one more minute and we'll get ready to go. All right, we'll get started. Once again, my name is Joe Viscuso. I'm a Director of Strategic Growth here at Pannoni, and presenting with me today will be Jeff Purdy, VP and Operations Manager for our Intelligent Infrastructure Systems, IIS, which is a division here at Pannoni. And then also presenting is Daniel Miles, the Chief Economist at ESI Thought Lab, headquartered in Philadelphia. I'm glad for all of you to be able to join us today. And as you can see, the title of our presentation is Smart Solutions. So I'm going to kind of give you an intro into what I call smart solutions and some of the evolution of how we kind of got here. And then Jeff will take over with some specific transportation examples. And then we'll move on to Daniel, who's going to talk about some studies that they've done, not only in the U.S., but that have gone across the world in terms of what other countries are even doing with smart solutions. So with that, we will move forward. So it's always good to start with a definition. Smart solutions, they're playing really a major role in the transformation of our infrastructure, real estate, facilities, and communications network. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a phenomenon just that to the U.S. here, but it is really truly across the globe in terms of how we are sharing and using information and data today. So homework for everybody that's on the call. First one is a poll question. And the question is, are you using technologies in your daily work production that you didn't use 5 years ago? And if you could answer that question, Steve at Penn State is getting the information for us and gathering it together. I tried to vote and it just says host and panelists cannot vote, so I'm locked out. Guess because we would carry more weight, maybe. And Steve is going to let that run about 30 seconds. Get an idea of kind of where we are, taking the temperature of where we are with technology. So Steve, what do we have?
At this point, we have 18 of 23 voted, and it's 100% yes.
100% yes. So that's a great starting point for where we are today. And I think we can all then say, since we had 100% participation, that will continue to grow as we move forward with this technology. I know here at Pannoni, we're using technologies that we didn't use 2 years ago. And I seem to be seeing a new one. We're going to talk about that. Jeff will talk about that a little bit further down in the presentation. So there's our vote count. Try to get my slides to move. So here's a little bit of an agenda, sort of how did we get here, how technology is changing the project delivery landscape, how AI is being used to gather project data, how data is changing how we're designing projects, how we are using technology to engage our stakeholders, and we won't talk much about the energy piece of this. That's another presentation. So I stole this slide from an event I spoke at in New Jersey a couple years back on when did smart start. Of course, these are the Roman aqueducts built in 312 BC. By the 3rd century, there were 3rd century AD, there were 11 aqueducts sustaining a population of more than 1 million people. And a few are partly still in use today. So what a novel, smart concept, right? That water moves by gravity, and building these aqueducts to move water from point A to point B. I think this can truly be maybe one of the first smart projects that came along. Transformation is really now, and I again, a couple quotes that I've stolen over the years. Up till 1900, human knowledge doubled every century. A few years ago, it doubled every 13 months. Today, human knowledge doubles every 11 hours. Think about these things, and they're kind of staggering. By 2022, the traffic generated by our smartphones will increase by 10 times from where it is today. I love this next one in blue here in the bottom left. It took 64 years for the airline industry to get to 50 million users. It took Pokemon Go 18 days. So again, demonstrates the power of technology and information and how quickly things move today. And it took until 1803 for the world population to reach 1 billion. And by 2024, we will get to 8 billion people. So definitely the number of people and information is moving much, much quicker than what it used to move. I'm a big golfer. I asked our CorpCom group to come up with this photo for me, and for those that either are not golfers or are much younger than myself, the U.S. Open in 1962 on the left, and the FedEx Cup playoffs in 2018. And again, for those that maybe you built one of these in science class in school, but that is a periscope, just a couple mirrors that enabled the people in the back to see over the people in the front of them. And again, I think it's a great visual, side-by-side visual of how things have changed over the years and how fast this technology will be moving as we go forward. I put together this slide too to talk about sort of the industrial revolution versus the technological revolution. So history tells us that the industrial revolution occurred between 1760 and 1920. And many, many new products and services came out of that long development time, right? The steel mill, locomotive, the automobile, airplanes, all great inventions, but a long time in the making. But cities and companies died because they didn't adapt to the demise of the Industrial Revolution. And my poster child for that is the city of Pittsburgh, right? Built around the steel industry, and just didn't see the technological or the industrial revolution ending, and really died as a city as a result. Now we're in this technological revolution, and really we're moving at the speed of light compared to the industrial revolution, right? Changes are mentioned just like that I just showed you with Pokemon Go a slide ago. Things are moving much quicker. That changes happen in days, weeks, and months, and not in centuries. As occurred with the industrial. Those that don't adapt will die a more rapid death. It will not be over a long period of time. It'll be very, very quickly. And those that thrive will. And now I've got Pittsburgh as my example on the other end of the spectrum. Pittsburgh reinvented itself around technology. A lot of the technologies that we see are coming out of our collegiate centers out there, like Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh. You know, that's a city that reinvented itself around technology. So one end, you know, its demise, the other end, its rebirth. So, and it really includes all of us as, you know, as the companies and places that we work and live in, is that if we don't adapt to this technology very, very quickly, then we too will die not a slow death, but a very rapid death. And then my last question there is, will it ever end? I don't really believe that there will ever be a pencils down in the technological revolution. I think that it's just going to continue to grow. I got a couple emails today with technologies that I was just blown away by, and they're not far out into the future. They're actually being deployed as I'm giving this webinar today. So I don't think that I just don't see an end to the technological revolution. It's just going to continue. So when we think about smart solutions, we have to think about what's changing the landscape. And the saying that's out there is that data is the new gold, and the companies that get and monetize the data will be the companies that. And again, I don't have to mention Google, Facebook, Amazon. What they're doing with data is just absolutely amazing, right? So these are the drivers, the continual innovation of technology, livability, workability, sustainability. Many of what I find amazing is that many of these technologies that are being developed actually offer operational efficiencies to our clients, and I think that's very, very important. They're not. It's not just technology being developed for the sake of technology, but they are bringing really savings back to the business and design communities. This move of urbanization, redevelopment. Now this slide was a little bit pre-COVID, and a big move into the cities. There's a big move out of the cities now, but I think a lot of that again is heightened by the ability to move technologies with you. I know that as a company, we scattered very quickly in March, and we're able to think what would have happened had COVID been a 1980s problem rather than a 2020 problem, or even a 1990s problem, right? So technology has allowed us to reconvene on the other side of this very quickly. Economic opportunities, many cities and towns. We're going to show you a video in a little bit from New Jersey on a town that's using technology, and this data is the new gold for economic development. Data collection analysis, cybersecurity, big problem, big issue. Safety, adaptation, planning, and resiliency. All are the drivers to these smart solutions. There are challenges. The pace of technology. One of the things I hear at a lot of the smart city events that I go to is how government has a difficult time keeping up with the pace of technology. I know I'm an adjunct at a university. I think our universities are having a very, very difficult time bringing these technologies to the student base because it is moving so quickly, and their ability to adapt and understand and know the softwares and technologies that are being developed, very difficult for them. So that is really a problem. Financing and funding. I already talked about lagging governmental policy. Sometimes it will take a government a year, 2 years, 3 years to put a project out on the street, and a lot of things are going to change from a technological standpoint in those 3 years. Stakeholder understanding and acceptance, who's going to be the first to raise their hand and use a new technology. Integration, workforce displacement, and skill sets, right? That's one that we hear about all the time, is just what does the new worker need to look like? Cybersecurity, we know about the breaches that are out there, and everything that we have is connected to the internet. I think about my house, my washer, my dryer, my car, my thermostat, if I have an iRobot cleaning my floor, all of those things are connected to the internet, and all of those give the ability for somebody to breach my household. The city of Atlanta, their cybersecurity attack occurred through their HVAC system. So that is a big problem. Legal considerations, early adoption, as I mentioned, who's going to be the first to raise their hand. Maintenance and upkeep, and then disruption to other industries. Think about Uber and Lyft and their disruption to the taxi industry. So advantages, right? There are advantages. I mentioned a few minutes ago this, think of COVID-19 and where we would have been without technology. Talked about operational savings, data sharing between verticals, the ability to really share data. You think of a smart city and their ability for the police department to share data with the health department, to share data with the public works department, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of advantages there. The ability to monetize the data. I think Jeff is going to talk a little bit about that later. Infrastructure sharing, streetlights, road right of way, et cetera. All of those things are now being interconnected via the smart city applications. I talked about economic development, sustainability. So there are some common threads of the, as designers, we are not coming up with these solutions on our own. We're looking out to technological partners. When I mentioned earlier, I think robotics has done a presentation at this conference. We're a partner with them, and their ability to use AI um, to um, to do road analytics and take something that was a very subjective analysis prior to their existence to something that's very objective analysis. Utilis, that one on the very bottom, also is using artificial intelligence and satellite imagery to detect water leaks. When water leaks into the into the soil, it leaves a stain because of the chemicals. We can't see them with the naked eye. Certainly we can't detect them if they're 2, 3, 4, 5 feet down. But the algorithms that they have written allow them to take satellite imagery. It's just regular satellite imagery that we would all be able to get our hands on and then detect water leaks through these through the algorithms that they have written. So all of the things that you see here, and again, I think Jeff will talk a little bit to this in a few minutes. So with that, I'm going to turn well, one more slide for myself here. When the smart cities, these are there are 10 pillars out there of the smart city space: energy, transportation, public safety, water, waste, education, healthcare, infrastructure, sustainable green buildings. We're going to focus. Jeff is going to focus on the transportation side of this. So with this, I'm going to turn the reins over to Jeff.
Thanks, Joe. And I think one of the things that you can see from that prior slide is transportation is not going to work. While it's called a pillar, it doesn't work in a vacuum. It really relates to everything that's around it. It relates to the environment. With the electric vehicles coming, it's going to relate to energy and the grid and how that is going to perform. And COVID-19, I think, has shown how transportation relates to the communities that it resides in. And I think the other part of this also that we need to be very much aware of is there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty that's taking place right now that will require the transportation professionals to be nimble, adaptive, and be able to adjust on the fly as things happen. Next slide. One more. There we go. So we've seen some drivers before on the whole smart solutions, smart cities case, but I think there's some in here that are particularly important. And one of the things to remember is the drivers of transportation and its evolution, the drivers that we're responding to today are not necessarily the drivers of tomorrow. Who would have expected, with 4G, LTE emerging, Uber came about. That's something, and they're a driver. So it's those things that we have to be aware of. And we have to ask the question also, is the COVID impacts on transportation, VMT, trip making, the loss of transit ridership and whatnot, is that really going to stick with the promising effectiveness of the vaccines that are coming? How much is that going to rebound? What is going to happen in that? And then the entire concept of digitization, we've already seen that it's disruptive, but it's a creative disruption that's bringing new stakeholders to the table and generating unexpected solutions. And one of the things I think that we really see here is that the drivers and the technology as it comes about, the digitization, has a tremendous data intensity to it. The data intensity or density of data, the pure volume of data that's going to be available to us is going to create an opportunity for us to have significant change in day-to-day operations. Next slide, please. Great. So some of the solutions that we have in that are fairly, we've heard a lot of them already through the conference and some of the other sessions. The things that are taking place in TISMO, we've seen some talk, some presentations on dynamic pricing. whether that's managed lanes or congestion pricing or mileage-based user fees, whatever. Those are things that they're going to be taking place, and that's all driven by the ability of advanced technology and new technologies. And I think one of the other ones that's going to be very important here is one of the solutions is down there as connected and automated vehicles. You need to remember that it's no longer connected and automated vehicles, but it's cased vehicles, connected, automated, shared, and electric vehicles. Those are the things that are going to happen. And I also believe that based on the richness of data that we're going to be able to get from sensing technologies, things like robotics, and it's the roadway infrastructure condition, bridge inventories, drone inspection of assets, the data that's going to be able to drive asset management and infrastructure management, I think is just on the beginning part of what's taking place today. And then finally, I'll just touch really quickly that this whole idea of rapid wireless electric vehicle charging is about to roll out on a really big scale. And that's going to change it so that the recharging of electric vehicles becomes incredibly convenient, which is going to change the table considerably as things go along. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we have now is innovation is the norm. And I think we're working with Rutgers and a team of people on this whole idea of the New Brunswick Innovative Hub. And we have a short video here on what this project's all about. You can bring the video up. There we go.
The New Brunswick Innovation Hub, Smart Mobility Testing Ground, is a concept proposed by Rutgers Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation, DevCo, and the City of New Brunswick to create a living laboratory in downtown New Brunswick, New Jersey. The Smart Mobility Testing Ground will be equipped with sensors to collect real-time energy data as well as autonomous vehicle-grade high-resolution data from vehicles, pedestrians, and infrastructure. This data will be provided to attract various high-tech industries to the region.
Well, I think it will be phenomenal for the New Brunswick transportation infrastructure to be the test bed, a living test bed for what we're moving into, which is our autonomous and fully connected vehicle technology. As we continue to grow the transportation system, we're going to have to do better than adding pavement. So we have to look at technology to solve that problem. And so the Innovation Hub and the Living Lab will help us to collect the necessary data to ensure that what we're doing in New Brunswick can then be expanded, not just throughout the county, but also throughout the state, and hopefully be a contributor to the region.
This project is really following Governor Murphy's vision of creating the hub in the city of New Brunswick, so that when people come ride on New Jersey Transit, they are coming for this high-tech, futuristic jobs rather than going to New York City and Pennsylvania. The latest technologies in smart mobility solutions are two parts. One is ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, and ADS, Automated Driving Systems. The data collected from this innovation hub can potentially be recreated because we are collecting the high-resolution point clouds from every single corner of this hub. So potentially in the virtual environment, we can create the absolute scene of the entire city. And we can even conduct what we call individual projection. So we can create the individual image that should be seen by a pedestrian, by a vehicle, to recreate those views they can see from this hub.
The hub will also collect data to be used for testing various technologies for electric vehicle charging and energy harvesting.
In future, we're looking to implement an ADS system for the first and last mile towards the innovation hub. So essentially, when the commuters coming towards the innovation hub, when they get into the city boundaries, they can let the vehicle take over, and the vehicle will drive autonomously, drive them to the parking lot, parking garages, and they can start working. They can take phone calls, make conference calls. They can start preparing for their new day of work. One of the issues right now with the hospital is the hospital gets crowded, sometimes with non-emergency patients. The autonomous shuttle services that can potentially be tested in this innovation hub can help redirect those patients to nearby satellite clinics that can help handling those non-emergency patients.
The data collected in the testing ground will support research and development in smart city solutions and smart mobility services to build innovative and connected communities in the future.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Thank you. Poll question for us. When do you think you'll take your first ride in an autonomous vehicle without a safety driver? So if Steve could bring the poll up, there we go. Choices are you've already done it, 1 to 5 years, 2 to 10 years, and over 10 years. So I put in the idea of you may have been able to do that already because there are slow speed autonomous shuttles operating in several locations. I think the one that gets the most publicity is Las Vegas. And there are some other ones in a retirement community called the Villages in Florida. And Contra Costa Transportation Authority in Walnut Creek, California has an autonomous slow speed shuttle that coordinates and gets people in and out of the Walnut Creek BART metro station. So as well as serving some distribution and circulation within the community. So it's a very interesting one. So that's where we are.
Give it a few more seconds here, Jeff, and then.
Yeah. So this question has been touched on in some of the other connected autonomous vehicle sessions. I know at one point we were thinking this question was asked a couple of years ago, and they thought that they would be available for us. So this is interesting. So yes, there is somebody that's already been on one. Congratulations. 1 to 5 years. So it's probably even split between 1 to 5 and 2 to 10. And then there's the pragmatic people out there saying it's over 10 years. That's a really good perception. I don't know if you've all heard the recent decision by Daimler to exit their research on phase 5 autonomy. And they have pivoted from that to looking at trucks and focusing their attention. They've opened up an office in Portland, Oregon, that is really looking at the automation and of connected and automated trucks. So that's pretty interesting to come. So that puts a lot of question marks. Is Daimler is pulling out of that, and Uber just sold off their automated vehicle program to Aurora. So that's an interesting one also, because we all thought that we'd be getting into automated Ubers at some point in time. So interesting to see that there is change taking place, and we really don't know where it's going to end up. So let's go to the next slide. That's not the next slide. There we are. So in conclusions, one of the things that we have to be aware of is that smart solutions are everywhere. Smart transportation solutions are everywhere also. They're in the urban areas, they're in rural areas, and they're all uniformly embracing emerging technologies. So Joe at the beginning said, if we don't adapt and change, we're going to be left behind. And the examples of Blockbuster, Radio Shack, Kodak, and others are examples. One of the other ones that's interesting is that in 2018, there was a study that came out that stated that the average lifetime today of a company in the S&P 500 is 18 years. Over the past decade, 50% of the S&P 500 companies have been replaced. At the current rate of replacement, an S&P company is being replaced about once every 2 weeks. If this trend continues, 75% of the companies on the index today will be replaced by 2027. And the average tenure of an S&P 500 firm will be just 12 years. It wasn't too long ago that the average tenure of an S&P 500 firm was over 33 years. So this reflects the rapid change in the valuation of some of the technology companies that are emerging. And those technology companies are emerging in the transportation space. So adoption, and innovation are essential. Smart communities will attract businesses, travelers, and residents. People will choose to be there. There was an interesting story in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the migration of companies out of the left coast or the West Coast to Austin, Texas, because of the smart innovation things, the transportation infrastructure that's there, job opportunities, the educational environment that's there. Definitely a smart place to be. But at the same time, I think innovation is going to change the way businesses operate. Pannoni's been changing with the introduction of technology. It's going to change how we train our staff, and it's going to change how we interact with our stakeholders and our clients, and more importantly, how we interact with our local communities. Next slide, please. So my final thoughts for today are something that you'll need to ask yourselves and be prepared for over the next decade. Are you still viable? How will you change? I don't think we can really anticipate that because the changes are happening really fast. I think the introduction of the FCC ruling on DSRC and the 5.9 gigahertz frequency, I think a lot of us are disappointed about that, but at the same time, there's a group called the 5GAA, which is the 5G Automotive Association, which is a collection of automotive manufacturers, telecom companies, technology companies. They have over 80 different members, and they've been working on this cellular V2X technology now, with demonstration projects starting back in 2018. So there's a tremendous amount of work that's coming that way. So what's going to come out of the 5G environment is going to be very interesting, both for our day-to-day lives, but also for transportation. So with that, I'll close out and appreciate the time today to give us some pretty high-level thoughts on smart solutions in transportation.
Thanks, Jeff. I think with that, I am going to stop sharing and pass the baton to Daniel Miles, who will pick it up from here. All yours, Daniel.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Joe. Just give me 1 second here. Okay. Thanks, Jeff and Joe. So like Joe said, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of the research that we did on smart cities. And just to give you a little bit of background, I'm with ESI Thought Lab. We're an economics and thought leadership consulting firm, and we specialize in analyzing the impact of technology on businesses, industries, cities, and economies. And this is what I'm going to present here today is an example of the research that we have done in smart cities. This is the second of 3 smart city studies that we have done. We have just kind of we're in the middle of our third. In the first study, we looked at kind of smart cities across the globe, trying to understand how smart cities are. And we looked at cities who are just at the very beginning of their smart city journey to cities that are very well advanced. And we learned a lot during that study. And in the second study, we decided to focus on what are the smartest of the smart cities doing? Kind of the cities that are using data, technology to interconnect all aspects of their urban ecosystem, from the transportation systems to the buildings, to the infrastructure, including their citizens. And this work is done as a part of a multi-client study. And the clients come together, they're non-competing clients from across the kind of smart city ecosystem. And the sponsors of this study included Pannoni, Stantec, Deloitte was the consulting sponsor. General Motors kind of had lended a transportation lens to the analysis, JLL, Visa, as well as a host of technology companies from Microsoft, Oracle, Nokia, and NTT Data. And in addition to the corporate sponsors, we also have a host of research partners. These are academic institutions and smart city leaders who come together to help advise on the research. And these included, when it existed, the 100 Resilient Cities from the Rockefeller Foundation, Anbaum, which is a think tank out of China, IESC, which is part of the University of Navarro in Spain, and many of you may be familiar with their Cities in Motion Index that they put out that ranks smart cities across the globe, the Penn Institute for Urban Research, the Smart City Council, as well as a number of organizations from the UN, including UNICE and United Smart Cities. And so just to give you a little bit of background on our study, what we did was we surveyed 100 cities across the globe. And this survey was designed to help understand how cities are using technology, data, and analytics across all areas of their urban ecosystem. And we also gathered in-depth data on the various projects that cities are doing in the smart city area, as well as kind of what return on investment they've received from those projects. And a little bit later on in the presentation, I'll give you an overview of what the results that we had from the transportation initiatives we asked about. And using the data from the survey, we developed this Hyperconnected Cities Index because we wanted to see how the leading cities in terms of being hyperconnected are using technology to transform and interconnect their urban assets. What are the most effective use cases that the best of the best have seen? And what benefits have the cities that are doing this best, what benefits have they generated for their cities? And in addition to the survey data and calculating this Hyperconnected City Index, we also collected secondary data from the 100 cities that we looked at. And all told, for each of the 100 cities, we had between the survey data and the secondary data, we collected about 1,600 individual data points for each city. And if we have time at the end of the presentation, I'll show you an example of the database that we put together. And in addition to the secondary data and the primary survey data, we also interviewed smart city leaders from across the globe to get their perspective on smart cities. So like I said, we surveyed 100 cities across the globe. 52% of the people we interviewed were senior urban leaders and 48% directly reported to them. And as you see from the list of titles here, most of the respondents we talked to were kind of the director of policy or strategic initiatives or the director of smart city initiatives. But we interviewed a whole host of leaders from across these cities to really understand how the cities are using data and technology to really transform their urban ecosystem. And here's a profile of the cities we surveyed. Since this was looking at kind of the smartest of the smart cities, as you would expect, a lot of our survey sample came from the advanced economies, so North America, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and Asia. And we had a good mix of population. The city size ranged from 123,000 all the way up to 24 million. And all told, the 100 cities we looked at covered about 400 million urban dwellers. So the smart city programs we looked at have impacted a large swath of the world's population. And as I said, we developed this Hyperconnected City Index. And the index was comprised of 4 components. So the use of technology. So how cities are using technology, what technologies they're using, and in what areas of the urban ecosystem are they using it? What types of data are they collecting? How mature are they in using that data, whether it's gathering the data, organizing the data, analyzing the data, securing the data was a big concern as well. And then cybersecurity, because in order for smart cities to function, cities need data, and people need to be confident in when they share data with the city that data is going to be protected. And as you see, as Joe mentioned earlier, Atlanta has suffered a cybersecurity attack. I think they might have been attacked twice. When Baltimore suffered a cybersecurity attack. So cities across the globe every day are suffering cybersecurity attacks. And when we did our first smart city study, we asked just one question on smart city maturity. We just asked, how well prepared are you for a cybersecurity attack? And 5% of the cities we looked at in the first study felt that they were well prepared. And we were shocked when we saw that answer. And so in this study, we dug a little bit deeper into cybersecurity to understand what threats cities are facing, as well as what they're doing to protect their city from cybersecurity attacks. And so what we did was we built this index using the survey data, and we classified cities into 3 categories: implementer, advancer, and leaders. And while, as I said earlier, these cities that we looked at were the smartest of the smart, so the leaders can really be considered kind of the super smart, the valedictorians of smart cities. And so this allowed us to look to see kind of what are the uber smart cities doing in terms of using data and technology to drive performance across their urban ecosystem. And this is a list of the 100 cities that we looked at. As you see, kind of in the leader category is most of a lot of the cities that you would expect to be there: Singapore, Hong Kong, New York, Seoul, London. But there's also a few surprising ones, like for example, Detroit. When we first kind of did this survey, we calculated the index and we looked at the data, and we saw Detroit being so high up there. We thought, I mean, this couldn't be right, kind of given everything you hear about Detroit in the news, almost filing for bankruptcy, all the other issues that they're facing. But when we really dug into it and we kind of followed up with a bunch of people in Detroit, we talked to them, Detroit is doing a lot of really interesting stuff. And I think the program has lapsed now, but I think at one point in time, Detroit had either the smartest intersection in the world or the smartest intersection in the United States. I can't remember which one. So I mean, Detroit surprisingly is doing a lot of work. But as you see, we had a good kind of global distribution of cities to look at. And so one of the things kind of we looked at was how are cities driving value for their residents? And one of the things we looked at was how are they using data and where they're using data. And what we found is that the way that cities, or especially hyper-connected cities, drive value is by interconnecting areas of their urban ecosystem, whether it's their IT infrastructure, payment systems, mobility. And it's technology that is the key to interconnecting these systems. And what we found is that the cities are using a wide array of technologies, but there's a few that have become, since we started doing this study, basically table stakes. If you're not doing these, you're falling behind. And this is Wi-Fi, IoT, which is becoming extremely popular in cities, the cloud, and mobile. And to a lesser extent, cities are using biometrics and AI. And biometrics, I think, had a bad rap there for a little while. There's a lot of a techlash of people kind of fighting back on the use, especially the use of facial recognition. But I think with the pandemic, the use of biometrics is starting to come back a little bit, because we were talking to a few cities in Asia as part of our new study, and they've used biometrics to help kind of control the spread of the pandemic. So I think kind of they are starting to find some uses for biometrics that go beyond facial recognition. And then to a lesser extent, cities are using blockchain and telematics. And then we looked at kind of where are these cities using these technologies. And as you see, kind of these cities are using these across their urban ecosystem, but there's a few areas where they're really sticking out in their use of technology. And one of those is mobility and transportation. And they're really making a lot of use out of using AI to drive their mobility and transportation investments and to drive performance in those areas. And I think it could be the example that Joe cited of using AI to collect road quality data, or a whole host of other areas that cities are using AI. And another area where they're using, which you would expect a lot in the transportation sector is IoT. And to a lesser extent, they're using a little bit of blockchain, but I think across the board, cities are still trying to figure out how to use blockchain and to really understand that. And then also a little bit, they're using biometrics in transportation. And then we also looked at how cities are using data and what types of data they're gathering. And as you see from this graph here, cities are using a whole host of data, whether it's IoT, artificial intelligence, and real-time data. Pretty much almost every city we talk to is using those data in some form or another. But then they're also using other types of data, whether it's social media, crowdsourced data, which is becoming extremely popular and could be very useful in the transportation realm. Geospatial data, we were surprised that it was so low. We thought it would have been a little bit higher, because pretty much every city has at least something mapped. And then they're also using behavioral as well as predictive data to a lesser extent, but the areas of behavioral and predictive data are expected to grow tremendously over the next 3 years. And then we looked at kind of what areas are they making the most use out of data. And what we found was that the number one was IT infrastructure and telecoms, followed not that far behind by mobility and transportation. So cities are using quite a bit of data to drive their mobility and transportation investments. And another thing we looked at was across the areas of the urban ecosystem, whether it's transportation, public safety, public health, environment, utilities. We asked cities what level of investment are they making, and what ROI have they seen from those investments. And I think all told, we asked about between 75 and 80 different technologies. What level of implementation do cities have, as well as what return they're getting. And then we use that to calculate kind of what is the ROI. And one of the things we're interested in looking at as part of this study is there a boost that cities can get by becoming hyperconnected? Are they able to unlock value that by just being smart, they're unable to unlock? And what we found is that when cities become hyperconnected, they're able to, their ROI increases 2 to 3-fold, depending on the area we're looking at. That by being hyperconnected and really using data and technology to interconnect all aspects of their urban ecosystem, they're able to unlock additional value than just being smart alone would allow. And if you see here, cities that are just at the implementator stage of being hyperconnected, these are still smart cities. They're still some of the smartest cities in the world, but they haven't taken that next step to become hyperconnected. Implemented cities get an average ROI from their transportation investments of 1.5%. But if the cities that are able to become leaders in hyperconnectivity are able to unlock ROI of an average of 5.3%. So there's a more than 3-fold increase in the ROI that cities are seeing from their transportation investments by being hyperconnected and really using data and technology to interconnect all aspects of their urban ecosystem. And we also looked at, like I said, we looked at a number of different areas across transportation and mobility to see kind of, well, how much are these in use, as well as what type of returns are they getting? And as you see, I mean, basically, 88% of leaders have at least a real-time transportation app, and they're able to get, they're estimated the ROI of 5%. And all told, 64% of the cities we looked at have real-time transportation apps. Mobility as a service app. Almost half the cities, more than half the leaders we looked at had mobility as a service app, but only 36% of the total sample did. But as you see here, I mean, across these different areas, whether it's digital public payment payment systems, real-time transportation apps, open loop payment system, predictive maintenance, by becoming hyper-connected and really kind of using data and technology, cities have been able to unlock tremendous value from their smart city investments. And the value goes beyond just kind of dollars and cents. The main benefits that cities are receiving are run the gamut from increased passenger satisfaction, increased on-time arrival, increased transit ridership, which is good, as well as increased access to employment opportunities. So it's I mean, I think a lot of times smart city investments get a bad rap that they're just to benefit the rich and the wealthy. But as you see here from the transportation investments, a lot of the benefits that come from these transportation investments are benefits that accrue to the people who are kind of the lower income people, whether it's increased access to employment opportunities, increased convenience for transit riders, because a lot of times it's the lower income people who rely on public transportation to get around, increased passenger satisfaction. And we also looked at traffic management. What are cities doing in terms of traffic management? And one of the really interesting things is that almost every city that's a hyper-connected leader is using real-time traffic management, 96%. And of all the cities, 77% are using it. So, I mean, it's almost like in the transportation realm, real-time traffic management is becoming table stakes. And they're able to, both the non-leaders as well as the leaders are getting a significant return from those investments. Another area that Jeff talked about, public electric vehicle charging stations. Almost 100% of almost every leader city is offering some form of public electric vehicle charging stations, and they're able to generate a return. But then when you get in some of the newer areas, whether it's curbside management, as well as other areas, kind of the adoption, at least last year, is a little bit lower, but it is growing. And we're seeing in this year's study that adoption of some of these technologies is continuing to grow. Another thing we looked at was how are cities paying for these investments? And they're using a whole host of different ways to pay for their investments, whether it's part of their local budget, consumption-based financing, social impact bonds, privatization of assets. Another thing that we found that a lot of the kind of the hyper-connected leaders are doing is that when they do a big, whether it's a big bond issue for an infrastructure project, they're trying to include some amount of money in that bond issue to pay for smart city infrastructure that they can then use in the future, which we found is that kind of is increasing, and that offers a very interesting way for cities to continue to generate revenue to invest for their smart city projects. And then we looked at kind of what are the way areas by the area of the urban ecosystem of how cities are paying for it. And transportation, 44% are using consumption-based financing. 4 in 10 are using department or local city budgets. Another 4 in 10 are relying on federal support. And revenue share and concession financing are other popular ways that cities are using to pay for their smart transportation investments. And as I said, what I just showed you was part of the second smart city study we did. We just launched the third study in the late summer, and we just received some of the survey data back. And what we decided to look at this year was, partly as a result of the pandemic, was smart city solutions for a riskier world. How how can drive urban resilience, sustainability, and citizen well-being. Using the kind of the pandemic as a lens to help understand how cities are preparing for the disruptions that are ahead. And so, what we found was that the pandemic has made resilience and sustainability kind of pressing imperatives for cities, and that COVID-19 kind of has served as a test case for cities, and has helped kind of demonstrate some of the weaknesses that cities are facing in their infrastructure, their risk management, their use of technology, and their data systems. And it kind of offers a real interesting lens through which to look at how well prepared cities are for the disruptions that they're going to face in the future. And I just want to, like I said, we're in the middle of doing this research, so I just wanted to tease a little bit of the results that we found, and some of the results are very interesting. What I'm showing here are the results we surveyed as part of the sample about 35 cities in the US. And what we found was we asked them how COVID-19 has impacted their city. And there's a few that are related to transportation that I thought I'd highlight today. So of the 35 cities in the US we surveyed, 80% said that the pandemic will cause their city to reconsider traditional approaches to urban planning, use of space, and population density. 67% will cause their city to reconsider mobility and transportation approaches to accommodate changing citizen behavior. And that almost half of the cities we looked at in the US said that the pandemic will permanently change the way that people live, work, socialize, and travel in our city. And all of these will have implications for transportation and mobility, and how cities are approach this going forward in the future. We also found that almost 3 out of 4 cities in the US that we surveyed ranked mobility and transportation as a high or very high investment priority. And that nearly 80% considered themselves to be either maturing or leading in the use of technology to achieve transportation and mobility goals. And that 70% have created a long-term transportation plan, and that 53% use data and analytics for transportation planning. So they are kind of using technology. They see the benefits from technology, and they are using data and analytics to help plan for the future. And I thought I'd share this graph as well. So we in addition to kind of the data on their smart city investments, we also asked cities how important each of these various modes of transportation are for their cities today, and how important they think they will be in 3 years. And I think that there's some very interesting results here. I thought one of the most interesting things was this: personal cars. Cities that think that, essentially personal cars are going to remain flat. The importance of personal cars are going to remain flat. And when you consider that with the significant rise that they're expecting in other areas, it's almost like the importance of personal cars are declining in cities. Car sharing is going to go way up. Bike sharing is going to go way up. Electric vehicles, as Jeff was discussing before, the use of electric vehicles is going to the importance of electric vehicles in cities is going to more than double. The importance of walking is going to almost double. And then autonomous vehicles is going to the importance of autonomous vehicles over the next 3 years in cities is going to increased significantly as well. And this goes along with some other research that we've done. For the past 3 years now, we've done research for KPMG and helping them construct their autonomous vehicle readiness index, where we rank the readiness of countries across the globe in the usage of, or the readiness for autonomous vehicles. And what we found, I mean, we've been doing this study for 3 years now, and this year we decided to, based on results and based on what we were seeing in our research in the past, we decided to take a deep dive into cities to understand really how cities are using autonomous vehicles and how they're getting ready for autonomous vehicles. And we were shocked at the number of pilot programs we found that are kind of just about ready to launch or have launched in cities across the globe. And so we think that kind of autonomous vehicles are at this kind of, are almost close to this inflection point. And I think cities are expecting them to kind of become more popular in the near future. And just if we have a little bit of time, I just wanted to share with you, hopefully this will work, but as part of the Hyperconnected City study we did, we created this Hyperconnected City database that I wanted to share with you that is now, that some of the data is available for the public. And I just wanted to show you some of the really interesting data that we have on these 100 cities across the globe. And also this is a website that we've put together for our current study that in cooperation with CityAge, where we're sharing the results of the study, and we're making resources available to the public. We have data on here on key insights, city resources, and then also part of this is our Hyperconnected Cities ranking in the database. And so you can access this through the website that I just showed, and then you could go into the city profiles and you could pick a city. And since I'm in Philadelphia, I'll pick Philadelphia. And you can see, I'll show you the types of data we have for each of these cities. So we have data on where their current priorities and where they're investing, their main challenges to implementing their smart city projects, their budgets. We have some baseline background data on the city population, the regional population, population density, GDP per capita, labor productivity, the rent index. And then we have data for each of the urban areas of the urban ecosystem we looked at. And one of the areas is mobility and transportation. And here we have where they ranked in terms of mobility and transportation within the 100 cities we looked at, the priority level we're placing on mobility and transportation, how long ago they started their most recent their first project, the benefits they're getting, their funding sources for how they're paying for their mobility transportation investments, and the progress they're making on a whole host of transportation related investments, from bike lanes to mobility as a service, to public electric vehicle charging stations, to intelligent traffic signals. And for projects that are in partial or wide scale deployment, we also have their estimated ROI that they're seeing from those investments. And then we also have a whole host of baseline transportation related data, whether it's monthly transportation pass prices, the average wait time, congestion data, the average price per gas, the ride sharing penetration, the number of ride share users, as well as the number of bike share docks. And we have this data for all 100 cities that were included in the index. And I guess with that, we'll open it up to questions.
I'm not seeing anything in the questions in the question box, and nothing in the chat box either.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. And I think Steve said in the chat that anybody that had questions could email them to him and he would pass them on to us. So I think with that, we are concluded. I thank everybody for listening. And again, if you want to contact either Jeff, myself, or Dan to Daniel to get any more information, we welcome your questions and or comments. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. and good holiday season. See you all.
Thanks.